Well, good morning and happy Tuesday to everybody. I can't believe it's the 25th of February already. Where the heck did July go? Um, well, I feel like a squirrel after drinking a large cappuccino. My attention span is just all over the place. It's like, look, something happened here. Look, something happened there. Jeez. Well, the president appears to have gotten pretty much all of his cabinet nominees through. Um, I think that Pete Hegseth, the new Secretary of Defense, had a good answer to this. I don't know who it was. She sounded like a shrieking harpy. This reporter said something about, what do you hired Dan Bongino to be number two of the FBI under Cash Patel, and he's not qualified. What do you have to say about that? And he said, I don't want to answer your unqualified question. That was a pretty boss move on his part. I think some of these people in the media are running scared. Um, I see that Jane Fonda came out yesterday and didn't really have too many nice things to say, but why is she still relevant? I mean, she's smoking hot at 83 years old. She's definitely an attractive woman, but who cares what she has to say? My dad was a Vietnam veteran who was wounded in combat, and he never thought much of Jane Fonda, but he died many years ago, but he had told me that he couldn't stand her, didn't like her on TV. He says, I want to turn the TV off when she comes on, but he said, I still support her right to speak freely. He says, I shed blood so she could say that she wanted me to die. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty amazing. But yeah, over the weekend in Germany, they had their federal, what they call their federal elections. They voted for their new members of parliament and to see which party gained control. Number one was the CDU and the CSU, which is the Christian Democrat Union and the Christian Social Union, I believe they call it. The CSU is what they call themselves in the Bavaria or Bayern state. The CDU is what they're known for in the rest of Germany, but they're a unified party. They just call it CDU/CSU. They took number one, and the new prime minister or chancellor, I'm sorry, chancellor is going to be a Friedrich Merz, I believe his name is. Now they call the CDU the Conservative Party, but that's by German standards. You have about 12 political parties over there. You've got the SPD, the Social Democrats. That's the outgoing chancellor, Olaf Scholz. They're more like center left to left Democrats, so to speak. Um, and the CDU, CSU would almost be like centrist to conservative Democrats or some moderate Republicans. They really don't have their political breakup is a little bit different. They've also got D Link, which is the left. They've got the Green Party. They've got the I think they call it the SGW or something. Sarah Wagenacht. They're a left wing party. They have the FDP, which is the Free Democrat Party. They didn't really do that well this time, but they're kind of, from what I understand about them, and I'm sure some of my German friends will um, enlighten me on it, but I think that they're economic conservatives. They're very pro business and they want lower taxes, but I think that they're more socially liberal on some of the issues. I don't know that much about them, but they did have the traffic light parties, which is the Green Party, the SPD, which is red, and I guess the FDP qualified as being yellow, the Free Democrat Party. They called it the Traffic Light Coalition, and I guess that fell apart. But the number two party, which really surprised me, is the AFD, the Alternative for Deutschland. They are the quote unquote far right party. Um, I don't really think that they're far right if you would compare them to the American political spectrum. It's just that the other parties are so far to the left, they seem that way. Um, I mean, I'm kind of a libertarianish independent, and I sometimes I lean kind of conservative, but To a lot of people, I'm far right. To a lot of people in the United States, I'm somewhere between Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun. But that's really not the case. But it just seems that way because when you've got like Schumer and AOC and Ilhan Omar and the squad and people like Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, and whatnot, I seem so far to the right, but I'm really not. But nevertheless, I'm not a politician, so it doesn't really much matter. But the Germans have their elections on Sundays, which I think is pretty cool. I also thought it was really neat that they used paper ballots and they knew the answer by Sunday night. By the time I went to bed Sunday night here in Virginia, they're 6 hours ahead in Germany. They already had all the votes tabulated and everything. I do understand that they had a problem in Germany with absentee ballots, which were cast by German citizens living in other countries. They didn't get the mail out in time or something like that. I could see that could be a problem. Sorry about that. When my wife and I lived in Germany, we could vote absentee by mail, and we had our ballot in plenty of time. Um, I think when I sent in the request, it took about 2 weeks or so for me to get my ballot, and I still got it almost a month before the election in the States. So I was able to go ahead and fill that out and send it back. And I checked online. My vote was counted. My registrar got it. We use paper ballots where I live in Virginia. We get the ones where you fill it out and then it goes into a scanning machine. And we have absentee voting with you used to have a reason. I used to be in trucking and I worked really bizarre hours, so I would go to my registrar and request an absentee ballot. This is long before the pandemic and everything, but I got an absentee ballot in the mail and I just dropped it at the registrar's office or mailed it in at my convenience. Never had an issue. It was pretty easy to get one. Now it's basically no fault absentee ballot. In Virginia, you don't need to give an excuse why. And we also have early in person voting, which I did this year when we came back from Germany. I went in, you can go 45 days ahead. It varies in every state, but in Virginia, you can go 45 days ahead of an election and you can vote in person, absentee ballot, they call it, in early in-person voting at your registrar's office. You show your ID, they pull you up on the list, you tell them your name and address and whatnot, and give you a ballot and you fill it out and send it into the machine right there. So you can vote 45 days early. Personally, I think that's too much. I think 30 days or even 2 weeks is enough time. But nevertheless, that's the law in our state. And I'm okay with it. The only thing is, if you vote early, you're looking at late September. And what if the person you vote for, what if they die, or what if they get caught up in a scandal, or they vote a certain way or make a certain political gaffe that is inexcusable? Well, then you've already voted. So that's something to think about. But it makes it easier that everybody's not standing in line at the polls on election day. So, because sometimes if the weather's bad or you get a flat tire, you get to work overtime at work. Your dog is sick. There's always these things that can come up. So, in my view, the early voting is a good thing. It makes it more convenient, and more people can participate in our democracy, as they would like to say. But I think Sunday voting has a certain appeal to it. In Germany, everything is closed on Sundays except restaurants and gas stations. The grocery stores are all closed. The hardware stores are closed. Everything's closed on Sunday. I guess they have you could call it blue laws, but nevertheless, everybody, with few exceptions, has off work on Sunday. So people can go and vote in person. And they didn't have this 2 weeks of counting ballots and having crazy shenanigans going on where they changed the election laws a week before voting. They didn't do any of that over there. So, and over there, apparently, from what one of my German neighbors had told me, they don't have to register to vote like we do. they have some kind of I guess it's a social registry, a citizen registry, and when they have their driver's license and their other documents and everything, um, they're registered to vote. I guess it's based on their precinct where they live, same as it is in the States. So they don't really have to register to vote, according to what my German neighbor told me. Um, but I find it interesting the AFD party came in second place over the SPD, which was they were the number one party before. The AFD party's only been around about a decade, and they had the strongest support in the areas of Germany that used to be ruled by communists. East Germany, um, the states like Thuringia, if I said that right, what is it? Lower Saxony, Brandenburg, and of course Berlin. And there's another one or two that I can't I'm drawing a blank on it, but I can see it on the map. But those places voted very strongly for AFD, which is kind of the opposite of communism, and that's maybe because those people had to live under communism for so long. But the AFD, one of they're very they're said to be anti-immigrant. They're not really anti-immigrant. They're anti-illegal immigrant, and they believe in immigration, but it needs to be strictly controlled. They see what's happening in Germany, and they don't care much for it. The old joke is that Germany's turning into Germanistan. Parts of it are, if you go to some of the cities like Berlin, Cologne, um, maybe Hamburg, Munich, some of the other places. I've been to some of these cities. There's parts of it where you think you're in the Middle East, and hey, there's nothing wrong with people from wherever they come from, but you have some people who are they're not. I guess they're moving there and they're not assimilating, and some of the younger or the older Germans are worried that a lot of migrants coming into the country are going to be causing them to get less in their pension and social benefits because they have to split the same pie into more slices. And then a lot of the younger Germans are worried that um, the newcomers are going to undercut wages, and they're also going to be competing for housing and jobs. So it's kind of the old and the younger against it. But the AFD, they want to get Germany out of NATO. They want to get Germany out of the EU. They want to get closer ties with Russia, and they want to remove the Germans from using the euro as a currency. They want to go back to using the Deutschmark. Um, if I've had some exchanges online with some AFD people, and the majority of them have been super polite. I was under the impression they hated Americans, but I had a few of them say, well, no, they don't hate Americans. They just hate the American government. I said, well, a lot of Americans hate the American government too. They got a laugh out of that. But they're changing they're having a paradigm shift, not only in Germany but in some of the other Western European countries. They realize that they want to be warm and inclusive and welcoming and everything, but they can't sustain that with a generous welfare state. Um, it's not possible to do that, and a lot of you look at Poland and Hungary, they're trying to keep a lot of newcomers out of their country. Now, Poland did accept a lot of Ukrainians who are refugees to live there with the expectation that when things get better, they'll go back. But Poles and Ukrainians, they're both Slavic people. They sort of have a lot more in common than somebody coming from, East Asia or something coming to Europe. There's sort of a little bit of a kinship there. And no, it doesn't have anything to do with their color. It's their culture is similar. We have there are people who are, what's the old saying? Skin folk doesn't always equal kinfolk. I guess that's a good way to put it. There are people in the United States who are of all different colors. I mean, yellow, black, white, red, brown, everything, who are culturally very similar and have a unique bond as Americans or United Stadians, as you would call them. They have a certain cultural, economic, and social bonding with each other. There's a certain amount of cohesion that, e pluribus unum. national motto from many, one, that people come from different places and they can be an American. You can come from, Botswana, Ethiopia, China, Japan, India, Pakistan, or even Australia, and you can become an American citizen. And yeah, you might talk a little bit funny for a while, but you'll be an American. And then when you have children and they're assimilated into American culture, they will become American, regardless of how light or how dark their skin is, whether they have straight hair, curly hair, or no hair. They can become American. There's like, look at our Olympic team. That's diversity right there. Our Olympic team, it's a mosaic of our country. The talent is spread throughout the human gene pool. If you look at the Olympic team from Korea, you look at the Olympic team from Taiwan, you look at the Olympic team from Congo, you look at the Olympic team from Norway, they all kind of have look the same. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's the way their countries are. But like I can I can move to Italy. I can learn how to speak Italian. I can learn to make pasta, but I will never be Italian. I can become an Italian citizen. I'll never be Italian. I could move to I could move back to Germany and decide I want to live there the rest of my life. I could learn to but I can see Deutsch, but I would never be German. I'll always be an Auslander. I could move to China. I could well, I love eating rice anyway, but I could eat rice every day and wear the great pajama outfit and I'm never going to blend in. I'm never going to be Chinese. I'm always going to be an Occidental. I'll never be Oriental. But the United States is kind of different in that regard. But in Europe, a lot of the countries, even though they have some diversity now, um, people in France are still known as Frenchmen. People in German are Germans. People in say Finland, they're Finns or Finnish. Norway is for Norwegians. Sweden is for Swedes. And the United States is kind of different in that regard. But immigration is can be healthy for an economy. It can even be necessary, especially if you have a low birth rate. But what European countries are struggling with right now is that they're having huge numbers of people come in from elsewhere, and they're not really assimilating, and they also tend to have a lot more children. And over a generation or two, that can cause some issues. And you can say, well, that's xenophobic. Okay, look at Japan. Japan, their population is rapidly shrinking. They have a lot. Their population is getting older and older. The median age is increasing like crazy. Um, China is even having a population situation like that. I believe Korea is as well. And those countries have historically been closed societies. You can't just immigrate to Japan. Um, I think they're rethinking that policy, but Japan is a society that's very orderly. It's very homogenous. Their traditions go back, eons. And they, if you take, if you took 100,000 Americans and put them in Japan, there's going to be a culture clash. If you take 5,000 rednecks from, South Texas and you move them to San Francisco, there's going to be problems. Is one person worse than the other? No, but that's just something that you have to keep that in mind. You know, you need to assimilate the people you already have before you invite in a bunch more. And that's easier said than done. I get that. But yeah, I've been trying to keep abreast of the news and it just seems like something's like pow, pow, pow. It's like you're playing political version of whack-a-mole. Even here in Virginia, it doesn't affect the rest of the country that much, but Virginia and New Jersey are the only two states this year who are electing a governor. We always elect a governor in the off year after a presidential election. And um, we have, as far as I know, there's not a libertarian candidate in the race for governor, uh, same as last time. But the presumptive Republican nominee is Winsome Sears, our current lieutenant governor. She is a woman. She's black. She's an immigrant from Jamaica. She's very tough. She's a Marine Corps veteran. and she is the likely front runner. If there is going to be a Republican primary or a caucus, I don't know yet. I know there is another candidate, I believe, who I think the guy's name was Brian LaRock. He's in the House of Delegates, and I believe he wants to run for governor as well. Um, Most people don't know who he is. Winsome Sears has better name recognition. The presumptive Democrat is Abigail Spanberger, who is a former member of Congress. She represented the 7th U.S. House District in Virginia, which is now represented by one of the Vindman. I think his name is Alexander Vindman. He's one of the two, there's twins, but I think they were both military veterans, but he's one of them. He's the 7th district, which is next to me. I live in the 5th district, which is represented by John McGuire, a former Navy SEAL who just got elected in November. He was in the state, he was a state assemblyman before winning the seat in Congress. He won out over a guy named Bob Good in the Republican primary. He got primaried out. I think Bob Good was anti-Trump and McGuire was pro-Trump, but nevertheless, McGuire won in the general election in November, which was to be expected. It's a fairly Republican district. But nevertheless, Abigail Spanberger represented the 7th. She also was a CIA operative. Um, she's very articulate. She's very smart. She has done very well with like Bill Clinton, campaign center, govern left strategy. Her voting record is very, very left wing, but she makes it sound like she's a moderate to conservative, and she's really not. But she's very good at putting that across. She's going to bring in a ton of out of state money, and rumor has it she already has $10 million in her campaign chest. So it's going to be a contentious race here in Virginia because we're basically a blue state. We do have a Republican governor right now, but we have a majority in both chambers of the state house that are Democrat, and the majority of our congressional delegation is Democrats, and um, we have a Democrat U.S. senator in both seats. We've got Tim Kaine and John Warner. Tim Kaine just won re-election for a third term. Uh, did I say John Warner? I meant Mark Warner. I'm sorry, Mark Warner. Both Kaine and Warner are former governors, and they joined um, George Allen and Chuck Robb, who were also former Virginia governors who went on to serve in the U.S. Senate. So in Virginia, a lot of these people fail upward. So Tim Kaine almost became vice president in 2016. He ran with Hillary Clinton. Thankfully, they lost, but he would have been our vice president. Now he's just a senator. But it's going to be all eyes are going to be on Virginia because Virginia is a state. If you look at it on a map, it's bright red, but it's just like Maryland. There are 5 or 6 areas where all the people live that turn the whole state blue. That's going to be the city of Richmond, city of Charlottesville, which is near me. I don't live in Charlottesville, but it's, the city line is about 10 miles from here. But um, you have uh, the Tidewater area, like Virginia Beach, Chesapeake, Newport News, and then Fairfax, Alexandria, and maybe Fredericksburg and Loudoun counties. But those are very heavily where the population is. Uh, my congressional district, the 5th, covers about a fourth of the entire state. Now we do have, I believe we have 11 U.S. House districts, and my district, the 5th, goes all the way to the North Carolina line. I guess the geographic center of my district would be probably in Lynchburg. I did meet John McGuire one time. It's probably been almost 10 years ago. He was in the state house then, and he's a former Navy SEAL, and he runs a fitness training thing. And I saw the guy. You look at him, and he's just kind of unimposing. He's a short guy. Just looks like an average dude you'd see walking down the street. And you look at the guy, and you're like, oh man, if you're a bad guy, you're thinking, oh, I could take him. And he took off his jacket, and I'm like, oh man, that dude is jacked. Those guys are like the Jedi of the military. He's definitely a very fit person. But I met him in person. He's very nice, very personable. He just has a very good commanding presence when you speak with him. Don't know how well he's going to do at Congress. He does have a telephone town hall tomorrow night. I might phone into that. I don't really know how that works, but there is a PIN number for it that's been put out. I should probably share that on social media later today, but nevertheless, I think he's trying to um, reach out to his constituents. My state delegate and my state senator are both leftist Democrats. One of them, my House of Delegate, she's very far left. My state senator is kind of center to left, but both of them are very anti-Second Amendment. I did contact both of them about that, and I received my state senator sent me a very nice, um, it was a form letter, but he acknowledged me himself and sent me a letter and that he appreciated my insight. And my House of Delegate, I didn't hear from her, but I heard from her staffer, and she offered to enable me to meet in person with her at her office sometime, which I thought was commendable. Usually people on the other side, they really don't get back to you that much, or they just send you, "Hey, thanks for checking in." But I was pretty impressed by that. When you send somebody an email that's critical, but I'm always polite, but you don't expect to hear back from them. So Virginia's going to be a bellwether state. We do, like I said, we have a Republican governor now, Glenn Youngkin, but in Virginia, you can't succeed yourself. You have to run a term, win, serve a term, and I'm sorry, you have to win. You serve one term, then you have to step down, and you can run again 4 years later. You just can't serve two consecutive terms in a row. Uh, I think there's been two governors in history who have served two non-consecutive terms in Virginia, but the lieutenant governor is not term limited. I believe Bill Bowling served 3 terms when he was lieutenant governor, and I don't think the attorney general is term limited either. All three are elected positions. This year in 2025, they're all going to be up. The governor, the lieutenant governor, and the attorney general are all going to be elected. And you can end up with a situation where you have a Republican governor, a Democrat lieutenant governor, and a Democrat attorney general, or vice versa, or any combination of the three. They all run in separate elections. And the job of the lieutenant governor is to preside over the state senate and be a tie-breaking vote. So the lieutenant governor, it's still a pretty important position. It's kind of like being vice president. You're one heartbeat away from being governor, but you serve to break any ties in the state senate. Um, the lieutenant governor, I guess, will also attend funerals and represent Virginia, sometimes maybe going overseas or as a diplomat or something like that. But nevertheless, all eyes are going to be on Virginia. Glenn Youngkin can't run again. I don't know if he's done with politics. My guess is he's going to run. I believe Mark Warner, the Senate seat occupied by Mark Warner, I believe that's up next year in 2026. So he might run for that. Like I said, we have a tradition of um, former governors in Virginia running for Senate. If uh, it ends up, we could end up in a situation like in 2021, Glenn Youngkin really didn't win so much as Terry McAuliffe lost. Terry McAuliffe was governor from, I think he got elected in 2013, and he served until the 2017 election. Then um, Ralph Northam won, and he served until the 2021 election, and he couldn't succeed himself. And McAuliffe ran again for a second non-consecutive term and was defeated by Glenn Youngkin. And really, part of the reason McAuliffe lost is because he made a comment that said parents shouldn't have any involvement in education. Some of that remark was taken out of context, but basically he just sort of stuck a thumb in the eye, um, saying that it needs to be left to the educational bureaucracy to run the schools. And I think that kind of sunk his policy. or that kind of sunk his campaign. But Glenn Youngkin did win um, by default, so to speak, and there was no true limited government candidate in the race. There was no there was no libertarian or constitutional conservative in the race at all. Um, Youngkin was kind of milk toast. He won, and he was a mixed bag as governor. He did advocate a few big government things, but he did veto a lot of really bad bills. So I have to give him a passing grade on being governor. Um, would I vote for him if he ran for Senate? I don't know. It would depend on who he runs against. But nevertheless, New Jersey and Virginia are going to be the bellwether states for this year. So it's been a crazy week, a crazy month. We got through the confirmation hearings, and some of those are kind of funny to watch. Now we've got the DOGE, the Doge, Department of Government Efficiency. Um, what really I find weird about that is that we have more whining and crying about Elon Musk and Donald Trump and the others finding the waste, graft, and corruption within the government, but nobody's mad about the fact that the waste, fraud, and abuse and corruption exists in the first place. That's what floors me. It's like, it's kind of like blaming your mailman for bringing you bills. Well, it's not the mailman's fault that you ran up the bills. So I think that, the American people, I don't know, you see a lot of complaining about it. And I do think that Donald Trump tends to be wanting to use a sledgehammer instead of a scalpel. Um, but, some of these things need to be done. But as far as having access to the information, well, nobody elected Elon Musk. Well, nobody elected the bureaucrats running these organizations either. You know, nobody elected them. No, you can't vote for the administrator of the EPA. As for people losing their jobs, my wife is a federal employee, so yeah, there's some pain in that regard. But um, you know, did any of these people at these federal agencies telling you that you had to lose your business during the pandemic, or you had to quit your job if you didn't take the jab or anything like that? Did these people shed a tear when they pass a regulation at the EPA? Um, do they care if it puts people out of work? Did they, Joe Biden said, well, the coal miners, they can always learn to go code. Well, um, it's like the shoe's on the other foot now. And, it always, people losing their jobs, it sucks. I've lost a job in my life through no fault of my own. It's happened to me probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 times during my life before I retired, that, certain things change. They make a management change. The customer base changes. It's a part of life. And if nobody lost a job, then there'd be nobody to hire for another job. And eventually, we hate it when we lose a job or get laid off, but sometimes it lays the groundwork for a better opportunity somewhere else in the future. I know that sounds so cliche, and it does, but that's sometimes what's happened. There are times that if you get fired or laid off or whatever, it it may feel like the end of the world, but then if you look back on it, maybe you did better because of it in the long run. It just sucks when it happens. But anyway, with this government spending, these people, you know, they have to get inside and they have to look at the books. In order to do an audit, they have to have the information to find out where the waste is and where they need to cut. I just think that they need to be a little more deliberate about it. It's like amending the Constitution. It's supposed to be a cumbersome and deliberative process that doesn't move hastily. That's why the founding fathers put certain rules into Article 5 to go about how you amend the Constitution. Because if they made it too easy, then why have a Constitution? You know, there's a lot of safeguards in the Constitution for things like that. Now this is a little different because these are things that are underneath A lot of these are underneath the purview of the executive branch. And for years, you have people running for Congress saying, I'm going to cut this. I'm going to be a vote to cut the spending. Well, then what happens is a bill comes along and it's got waste in it. But if you vote against that, you're voting for funding the troops, or you're voting for, um, you know, giving money that's going to help, I don't know, help old people, or it's going to fund uh, something for the handicapped. Well, you don't want to have to run for reelection and have your opponent say, well, you voted against the thing to build the handicap ramp for the old ladies at the nursing home, or you voted against uh, funding a raise for teachers, when really there's a lot of bad stuff that's in that. And that's what happens. They put these earmarks on bills, and you'll have a Democrat who will go to a Republican and say, hey, look, I want I want money for this to study a gun control initiative. And the Republican will be like, well, I don't want to vote for gun control. And then he'll say, well, I want you to vote for this because it's, I don't know, a pro life piece of legislation. And the Democrat says, well, I don't want to vote for that because it's pro life. Well, they both will compromise and come up to where they're both supporting more pork, but they don't want to alienate their voting base. So they'll say, I voted for this because it funds the military, when in reality, it's got a whole bunch of like studying underwater shrimp running underwater on a treadmill or something like that. Or another congressman will sponsor a bill to build a highway, but then in that, there's a whole bunch of pork for a new community center in his district. It's just like cutting defense. They'll say, let's cut defense. But then when they want to cut a base out of that congressman's district, well, no, that'll cost jobs. Well, we've seen throughout the years that the debt keeps going up, the spending keeps going up, the borrowing goes up, they print more money, inflation goes up. We got to get a handle on this. And it doesn't seem like the people in the House of Representatives and in the Senate have the testicular fortitude to do what it takes to make the necessary cuts in the budget. And what they will do is they'll say, well, I wanted 150 billion for this program, but we're spending 100 now, but we're only going to spend 120 billion, so I cut 30 billion out of the budget. Well, really didn't cut 30 billion. You're still spending 20 billion more, but they're using projected spending. So they can say, well, I cut this. And politicians in both parties have done it. And the rubber is meeting the road. We have to do something, because if we don't get a handle on this debt, um, we're going to impoverish the next 5, 6, 7 generations of Americans. My grandson is not even 5 months old yet, and he's got about $100,000 worth of debt on him that he had nothing to do with creating. Now, that's not fair. Now, it's easy to say, oh, well, you want to screw over the old people by messing with Social Security. Well, you want to screw over future generations who aren't even born yet. That's just as selfish, if not more. Um, you know, we're going to have to look at our priorities and what we need to do. Right now, our national debt is almost 37 trillion. We face 180 to 220 trillion, depending on your think tank you trust, in unfunded future liabilities. Um, the national debt grows by another trillion roughly every 100 days. And the interest alone on the debt, not counting the principal, the interest alone is almost $1.2 trillion. That's for 1 year. Okay. That's for fiscal year 2025. The interest alone is going to be 1.2 trillion. That's about 25% more than the entire defense budget. And that number is going to gradually increase, especially if interest rates go higher. Um, we got a real problem. We got a tiger by the tail here. We've got to find a real spending a solution to cutting spending. We can't tax our way out of this. We can't borrow our way out of it. And we can't print our way out of it. If we don't get a handle on this, we're going to have some severe austerity measures coming our way that aren't going to be it's not going to be very pleasant. And if that happens, if we don't involved in a civil war by then, we're going to have an Article 5 convention of states, and you're going to see the states start to peel back the layers of the federal government. They're going to reassert their powers under the 10th Amendment, and you're going to have It takes 34 states to call and 38 to ratify. You could end up with a balanced budget amendment, legislative term limits as an amendment. Um, you could even have the taxing authority of the federal government rescinded by a constitutional amendment where they could just go back to having just tariffs and excise taxes, which is not enough to run the government. But they could move to they could scrap the income tax altogether, go to a transaction tax, a consumption tax, or something else that would keep the taxation level of the government on par with economic activity. So when they do things that destroy the economy, it lowers the amount of taxes they can charge. There's any number of ways to look at this, but we got to do something. I'm pushing 60, so I've got a lot more sand in the bottom of my hourglass than in the top. But our children and grandchildren are going to have a tough road to hoe if we don't get a handle on this. We keep kicking the can down the road to let somebody in the future worry about it. Social Security and Medicare are almost bankrupting our country, and you've got people in Congress who are like, well, we need to have Medicare for all. Well, we can't even afford Medicare for some. And there's also a constitutional question for that, because retirement, healthcare, education, and housing are not enumerated powers of the federal government in the Constitution. The 10th Amendment reserves that to the states and to the people. And eventually, if we don't get a handle on this, the states are going to rise up. Enough of them are going to rise up and say, enough. We're not going to do this anymore. And if you think the last time we had a war between the states was bad, well, imagine how bad it would be today. We don't want to go down that road, but the longer we wait, the worse it's going to get. The analogy I like to use is that the ship of state is like the Titanic. We're sailing in the North Atlantic, and there's an iceberg straight ahead. The captain's asleep at the switch. The first mate is too busy socializing. The Democrats are running around trying to rearrange the deck chairs, and the Republicans are insisting on polishing the brass. Meanwhile, nobody's turning the steering wheel, nobody's pulling back on the throttle, and downstairs in the dining room, the the people down there are opening more champagne and telling the band to keep on playing. And if we don't change course and slow things down a little bit, we're headed straight for the iceberg, and there's not enough lifeboats for everybody. That's not the best analogy, but it's one that I could think of it's applicable to our ship of state. We got some really serious issues, and right now the two parties, there's always been division, but this is really getting crazy. There's a lot of people in both parties who have their hands in the till, and I think a lot of people don't want to get caught. Um, I'd love to see that list about who has been on Epstein Island. That would be interesting. There's a lot of stuff. You can go down the rabbit hole, but there's a lot of things they're not telling us, and a lot of people are starting to ask questions, and they're going to demand answers. Now, um, do I have a lot of faith that the Orange Man is going to be able to fix things? I don't know. I'm very skeptical about it. I don't know if he's got the wherewithal to get to the bottom of a lot of these problems. But the executive branch over the years has grown a lot. Um, we one thing is for sure, whatever you think of the Orange Man, had the election gone the other way, that there is no way anyway people be talking about the waste and inefficiency in the government. Nobody would be talking about cutting spending. They'd be growing the government. They'd be concentrating more power inside DC in the executive branch, and they'd be pushing to raise taxes and pushing to spend more. So, is he going to be able to fix it? I don't know. I don't have a lot of faith that he can, but at least he and Elon Musk are making people aware of what's going on. And when you have the most powerful man in the free world and the richest man in the entire world working together on the same team, something good has to come from it. But I'm a guarded skeptic. I'm just going to say Listen to what politicians say, but more importantly, watch what they do. Well, I've rambled on long enough. I'm just going to leave it at that. Um, hey, look, squirrel. That's how my mind feels right now. There's just something new like goes on every day. There's some kind of scandal. Somebody does something. The biggest thing now is that the little spat with the president and the governor of Maine about the so-called transgender athletes, boys in the girls' locker room. Okay. I think that's a bunch of nonsense. I think that you should live your best life. If you're a man and you want to be a woman, or you're a woman and you want to be a man, knock yourself out. If you're over the age of 18, you do what you want. But I still, I don't have a dog in that fight, but I just don't think that men should be competing, or males should be competing against females in contact sports. But is that a hill I'm going to die on? No. Do I think the president should be involved in that? No. Do I think the federal government should be involved in it? No. But then the governor of Maine says, I'm standing up for the law. And the president says, well, I'm going to take away your federal funding. That's another problem. There shouldn't even be federal funding. If Maine wants to do that among its own schools and their athletic bodies sanction it, then so be it. Tough. But the president shouldn't. This is so far beneath the office of the presidency. A man can never be a woman. Well, I should say a male can never be a female. You can chop things off. You can add parts, this and that. I've seen some pretty good, you know, um, I've seen some pretty good. I don't even know what you call them. People who have made the transition, that you're going to be like, hey, you'd be fooled. I get it. Okay. I don't know how dating works and you're in a situation like that. I'm an old man. I'm married and I'm straight, married to a woman. If somebody else is into the, you know, others, that's fine. I don't care, as long as you're over the age of 18, knock yourself out. But you know, it may be only a small number of people, but if you're a man, you're never gonna give birth. If you're a woman, you're never gonna father a child. Um, I okay, I didn't make the rules. Okay, that's been that way for since the dawn of time, and nobody's gonna change that. But if somebody wants to change how they identify or whatever, okay, I don't wish any harm on you. I've seen the 6 foot guy with a beard wearing a dress in the store, and okay, not my thing, but I don't think anybody should beat you up for it or anything like that. But when you've got a 6'2" male competing in a contact sport against a 5'6" female who weighs 50 pounds less, I don't know. It just rubs me the wrong way. But then again, I don't want the federal government involved in that. If the NCAA and the schools and the teams decide that's how they want to roll, then okay, fine. That the federal government has other things they need to worry about. And I'm sorry if I sound like an old curmudgeon saying that, but you know, they've got wars to fight. They've got a country to protect. There's infrastructure. There's things that the federal government should be doing that don't involve, who gets to be in what locker room. That's let the schools and the states and the people directly involved worry about that. If you make the federal government big enough to give you everything you want, it'll be strong enough to take anything you have. That's pretty much how that comes down. The 10th Amendment hasn't been repealed yet, folks. But anyway, I will leave you with a quote of the day from George Washington. He said, government is not eloquence, it is force. Like fire, it can be both a dangerous servant and a fearful master. Peace to all of you.